Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my bracket video for the Summer Showdown. This is the North America bracket. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the Asia bracket. So let's just jump into it. This is going to be an interesting tournament. There's a lot of interesting teams and some interesting spots. The Atlanta Reign at 2, the Vancouver Titans at 4, the Eternal at 8, the Valiant at 5. It's the Mayhem at 7. It's a very interesting tournament because the teams are not really where you think they would be based on what we've seen recently, especially with the Titans in the top 4. Let's start with the knockout round, the first round where we have the teams who already picked their opponents. We'll start at the top, LA Valiant taking on the Toronto Defiant. This is an interesting one. I think there is certainly upset potential here. The Toronto Defiant are a team who have looked pretty good at times, but usually they don't look that good. But when you have Kariv and Surefour and Logix, really there's no telling what you can do. So this is an interesting matchup. I like the Valiant better. I think that they have the better chance. I think that they're the better team. They've looked better this season. I certainly don't think it's a guaranteed win for the Valiant. I think if they don't come in prepared enough, I think that the Valiant could take the win pretty, or the Defiant could take the win. I don't think it's going to be a dominant win if the Defiant win. I think it'd be pretty close, but I think the Valiant are going to win. I think they're just a better team. I think it's much more likely that they win because they're better and they have proven themselves more against some better teams than the Defiant have. The Defiant don't really have a good result, especially recently. Their best result was their first win of the season in week 1 against the Paris Eternal, and ever since then they haven't really done anything. So I like the Valiant. I think they're better right now. And I think it's a pretty convincing win for the Valiant. Next is the LA Gladiators taking on the Washington Justice, a rematch of a match we saw this past weekend. A rematch of one of the worst matches of the weekend. It was not good. The Gladiators won, and I expect them to win again. Spoiler alert. But the Gladiators didn't look very good. The Justice managed to win the play-in match against the Boston Uprising on Sunday, so they were picked by the Gladiators. But I really don't like this matchup. I think the teams are both not that good. I think the Gladiators are the weakest team of these 4 higher-seeded teams here. I don't like what they've looked like. I think they've looked bad. They had one of the worst offenses I've ever seen on Rialto. It was atrocious against the Justice, and I thought that the Justice honestly made the Gladiators look like a bad team. Right? The Justice, a team who are not very good, made the Gladiators also look like they were not that good. So I think the Gladiators will win. I have little to no faith in the Gladiators as a team. I think they're not that good, and I think that they, even if they beat the Justice, don't go any further than that, because I just don't think they really have that much going on in their favor. Next is the Florida Mayhem against Houston Outlaws, another rematch from this past weekend. It was a 3-2 when these two teams played. It was a pretty good match. The interesting thing is that Dante revealed that they didn't prep for a map 5. They didn't think they would go to map 5. They thought they would win before that. A little bit of a coaching mistake potentially there, but now that you have the ability to pick the maps you want to play. And, well, if you lose. And they've had, a week to look back at what they did against the Mayhem when they played them. Last weekend, I think this is a different matchup. I think that the Mayhem are still favored. I think the Mayhem should still win. But I think that it's not as one-sided as what I think people had predicted last week it would be. I think it could still be a 3-2, 3-1 game. I definitely think the Houston Outlaws will take at least one map. They definitely could just get completely shut out by the Mayhem. The Mayhem are that good, and they've looked good enough to do that. This is certainly, to me, the game where it's most likely there's an upset. I think the Houston Outlaws beating the Mayhem wouldn't be the most surprising result. But I think the Mayhem are going to take the win. I think they are the better team. And I think that it's a good performance from them because I feel confident in their abilities. Final matchup of the knockout is the Paris Eternal against the Dallas Fuel. This is a weird one. I think the Eternal are the better team. I think the Fuel have the better player in Decay. I think Decay is the best player potentially in NA right now. I mean, you could argue otherwise, and I think that there's other players who I definitely think are better. I think Carpe is better right now. I think that we're seeing better performances out of players on the Shock. I think Yaki is a player you can definitely look at, but Decay has been really, really good. He hasn't played for the past 2 weeks for this Dallas Fuel team. I would expect him to play during this tournament. It would be kind of weird if he didn't. And I think it's a really interesting look that we get here, because the Paris Eternal have been running a lot of Sparkle Genji recently, because that's, for them, what they kind of need to be running. It makes the most sense when you consider where this Eternal team is when they want to run Sparkle, because he's their best player. We also saw a lot of Doha Genji. We haven't really seen a ton of Genji v Genji yet this season, so it would be interesting to see Paris versus Dallas, Genji versus Genji. I think Sparkle probably wins that Genji duel. I don't think XZ wins the Widow or Tracer or Ashe duel, or soon even. I don't think he wins that duel. So I think it's an interesting matchup. I like the Eternal better. I think they are the better team right now. I have a little more faith in them to win this one, but I could see the Dallas Fuel winning. And I think if the Dallas Fuel won, it would be a pretty good performance out of them. And I think it would be interesting to see. Next, we move on to the quarterfinals, where the teams once again pick their opponents, starting with the San Francisco Shock as the highest seeded team in the tournament. I think they look at their opponents. I don't think the Shock are going to mess around. I think they're just going to go easy, and they're not going to be the team who's like, oh, we're going to pick this team because they're bad, or we're going to pick this team because, you know, we want to beat them because they beat us before. I think the Shock just said we're going to pick the Gladiators because the Gladiators are the weakest team in the region, and or of these four, and we want to beat them, and we want to move on, and we want to get a guaranteed win. The next pick goes to the Atlanta Reign, which is the place where I think it gets interesting, because I don't really know who the Reign would want to pick. They've lost, I'm pretty sure, to every team of the four in the knockout round. They lost to Paris, they lost to Florida, they lost to Gladiators, they lost to Valiant. So they're the weakest team, potentially, of all of these teams remaining, except for Vancouver. I think Vancouver's weaker than Atlanta is, which was proven this past weekend. But Atlanta's one of the weakest teams. So they're the number 2 seed, but they're not better than any of these 4 teams that I have put over here. But I think if you're Atlanta, the team that is most likely to be beatable is the Paris Eternal, because they run a weird composition. They run a different style than what other teams run. They run this Genji comp, but if you're Atlanta and you feel like you can shut down that Genji comp and you can beat this composition that isn't kind of meta, you can run your double shield, you can run your Ashe compositions, you can run your Tracer, and I mean, they've run some Genji too. I just think that the Atlanta Reign would rather play Paris than the Florida Mayhem or the LA Valiant. I think those two teams are better than the Paris Eternal right now. Paris has gotten, they got a big win over the Valiant. But we haven't seen much in the way of adaptation from the Eternal. They've been running a lot of the same kind of compositions. If you're the Atlanta Reign, I think you can abuse that. You can kind of take advantage of that by looking at the Paris Eternal. What they've been doing, you can kind of just force them onto maps that they can't really run the Genji on. When they played the Valiant this past weekend, when they didn't have Sparkle in, they lost. And I think that's what the Atlanta Reign are going to try to do, is just force them off of the Genji compositions, put them into positions where they can't play the compositions they're comfortable on. I think that's the way that the Atlanta Reign have the best chance of winning. Next is the Fusion pick. They pick between the Valiant and the Mayhem in my scenario. I think they would pick the Valiant. I think the Valiant are a little less scary than the Mayhem. Now, I could see the Fusion being a team to be like, we lost to the Mayhem in May. We don't want to lose to them again. We're going to pick them because they know how to beat them now. We know how to do whatever. I don't think that they do that. I think that their best option is the Valiant, and the Valiant are the easier opponent. A little bit easier. Yes, the Valiant beat the Mayhem, but that was when the Valiant were able to run the meta that was perfect for them. I think the Mayhem have a little bit more flexibility, not a ton more, but a little bit more, because I think their roster is just better slightly, so they have a little more flexibility that the Valiant don't really have. The Valiant are going to pretty much run Tracer Ashe or Tracer Widow or something like that whenever they can, because Shax is a really good Tracer and KSP is really good on the hitscan heroes, so they don't really run a lot of variants. The Mayhem, we've seen them run the Echo compositions, we've seen them run Sombra. There's a little bit more that Florida runs than what the Valiant do. So in the Fusion can kind of look at the Valiant and say they are much more counterable because they have a weaker style, because they're not as flexible. I think that's why they pick them. And that leaves Florida to play the Titans. So, Shock, Gladiators. I talked about that a little bit already, picking the Shock. I think the Shock are the better team. Gladiators are the weakest of these teams, with maybe the exception of Vancouver and maybe Atlanta, but that's even then pretty close. Gladiators, inconsistent team. They don't look that good in a lot of their recent performances, and I think the Shock are too dominant for them to lose to a Gladiators team. Mayhem versus Titans, taking the Mayhem. The Titans, though they've improved, I still don't think are good enough to take a win off of a Florida Mayhem team that I think is really good. I think this Titans team has some room to grow. I think they will get better, but I don't think this season is the Titans season. With the changes they've made, I think it's pretty clear that the option for them going forward is to look into the offseason and into the future, bring in some more players, bolster their roster, make it stronger. But for now, I think the Mayhem are the better team. I think they take that one because I like the Mayhem. I think they've been very good this season. The Fusion against the Valiant is an interesting one. As I said before, I think the Fusion will find it easier to counter the Valiant because they have really one style. And I think if you are trying to play one style against the Fusion and the Fusion know how to beat it, they're going to beat you every time. I think it's a close one, 3-2, 3-1 type series. But ultimately, I think it goes the way of the Fusion. I think they're just a better team right now. Who knows about the future? I mean, I could definitely see this one going the way of the Valiant in a Tracer Ash meta. But if it's not a double hit scan meta, even if it is, I could still see the Fusion winning. If the Fusion can just exploit that, I think they win. I think that's something the Fusion are pretty good at doing. Even if they have a more sloppy style, I think that's something they will do. Atlanta versus Paris is a really interesting matchup. I think that Atlanta has looked better, though I'm still not super confident in them. I want to see some better results out of them. They haven't beaten teams who are better than they are. So how good are they really? I like Paris in this matchup. I think that, as I said, Atlanta has the ability to learn from, Paris running weird compositions and just kind of beat those weird compositions. But I don't think it's going to be enough for them to beat Paris. Paris has run a lot of things that have looked good. They've run some things that haven't looked as good, but I feel more confident in the Eternal and what they've looked like than the Atlanta Reigns kind of all over the place play style that seems to go up and down on the week. It doesn't seem very consistent, and I feel like the Paris Eternal are going to take advantage of that and find the win in that series. Semifinals, Shock, Mayhem, rematch of the May Melee Finals. I like the Shock personally. I think the Shock have looked better, obviously. I think they're the best team in NA right now. I don't think it's impossible for the Mayhem to get the upset win over the Shock. I think the Shock are better, and I think when you have map picks, when you lose maps, that's really what benefits a Shock. When they can, as the series progresses, they can force Florida off the compositions they're comfortable on, which is exactly what we saw in the May Melee. I'd expect the same thing to happen here. I think Florida still has a couple things they need to work on to improve. Like their Baptiste play has still been interesting. I don't think Chris is that good on Baptiste. Gangnam Jin's pretty good, but if you're running like double hit scan or double flex support, you're running like Baptiste Zen or something, like, is Byram any good at Baptiste? Could you put him in for a couple maps? I mean, that's what Shock does with Twilight and Violet. It's not impossible, but I don't think the Mayhem take this one. I think the Shock are just too good. The interesting matchup is the Fusion against the Eternal, because the Fusion have won 2 of the 3 matchups this season with the Eternal, all of them in 5 maps. But since Sparkle has turned 18, the Philadelphia Fusion have not played against the Paris Eternal once. So what happens? What is the thing that happens in this match when you do have Sparkle, and how does that change? I think the Fusion have a much more flexible roster. I think they can run a lot more. And I don't want to be too reactive to them losing to the Shock in the fashion that they did. I think if the Eternal played the Shock this past weekend, they would have lost just as bad. The Eternal did lose that badly the week prior. I think if the Mayhem played the Shock this past weekend, they would have lost just as bad. And the Shock are just that good. So it comes down to, Fusion versus Eternal, what is the big X factor? What kind of changes? And it really comes down to Sparkle. How much of an impact does Sparkle have on this match? How good is his play? How much does it elevate the Paris Eternal beyond where they were the last time that they played this Fusion team, which was also a 3-2 result? I think it's really difficult to call this one. Part of me wants to pick the Fusion because I think the Fusion are, the stronger team. I think overall in terms of position and roster, but they seemed very lost this past week. They were, beating down on teams that weren't that good, and then when they played against a good team, they got embarrassed. But like I said, it's the shock. How much you really learn from that? The Eternal didn't look very good until this past week, where they looked good against a strong Valiant team. So it's difficult to say for sure who wins this one. I think it's sort of like a 51-49 for whoever wins. I've been back and forth between the Fusion and the Eternal, but I am going to take the Eternal because I want to see the difference that Sparkle makes, and in my mind, Sparkle is the X factor that makes enough of a difference to elevate the Eternal past the Fusion. Now, I don't think it's crazy if you think the Fusion are going to win. I think it's very, very possible that the Fusion win. But for me personally, right now, I prefer the Eternal in this one. Fusion, good. I may have said it wouldn't be weird if you picked the Eternal. It wouldn't be weird if you picked the Fusion. And the Fusion very much could win this one. They can win at 3-0. They can win at 3-1. They can win at 3-2. Whatever. But I don't think that the Eternals play when they were first integrating Sparkle is obviously as good as they are. I think that, you have to get worse before you get better. You might look a little bit better at first, and then you dip down again, and then you kind of jump back up and start looking better again. I think that's kind of where they are. I think the ability to play Genji has really elevated the Eternal. I thought the Fusion looked lost this past week, and I think that is the X factor that helps the Eternal get the win. Finals, you already know who I'm picking. It's the Shock. Shock, I think, win this one pretty easily. I'll select this, even though it's going to bump me over to the Asia bracket. Boop, back to North America. Shock, I think, win this one. I think the Shock are the better team. I think they just look better. I think the Eternal, last time they played, Eternal got embarrassed. I would expect the same thing to happen here. I don't think that this is a very open bracket. I think that the Shock are going to win. There's no doubt in my mind that the San Francisco Shock are going to win the NA bracket. I just think that there's no one that can really stop them. There's no one good enough to get in their way. So I think that this is a pretty easy dub for the Shock in the Summer Showdown NA bracket. This bracket thing, if you don't know, is from the Overwatch League. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video. If you want to check it out, it's linked in the description down below. You can make your own bracket, share them on Twitter, social media, whatever you want to do. But that is my bracket. So let me know your own bracket, your own thoughts on the tournament down below. Who you think's going to do well, who you think's going to not do well, whatever, you have to say. Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But that is all for today. Tomorrow, I will take a look at the APAC bracket, and we'll see how that tournament is going to go, in my opinion. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.